So, I'm going to talk about someone who really inspired me to do great things, and that's Dang Trân Tung. He's actually a well known IELTS trainer in Vietnam, and I believe he was the first person in the country to achieve a 9.0 overall, not just once, but maybe three or even five times. I can't quite remember exactly. I first heard about him because he was already quite famous. He was all over the internet, and students were constantly sharing his tips on how to improve their speaking skills and how to learn English as a language, not just as a school subject. What inspired me most was his pronunciation. It's nearly perfect. Honestly, sometimes I can barely tell the difference between the way he speaks and a native speaker. At least, that's how I feel. On top of that, he's an excellent speaker. He knows how to express his ideas clearly, persuasively, and with confidence. And what I really love is that he's funny. He often makes jokes while teaching vocabulary, which makes the lesson more memorable and enjoyable. Learning new words can be tough, especially for non native speakers, but his humor really helps. So, yeah, he truly inspired me. Back then, I used to hope that one day I could become like him. Well, I'm going to talk about an outdoor sport I'd really like to try for the first time, and that is parachuting. I know it sounds a bit crazy and dangerous at first, but I honestly do want to give it a go. I mean, who doesn't want to challenge themselves, right? I think trying something so extreme could help me become a braver, better version of myself. That said, I'm aware that parachuting is not cheap. To take part in it, you probably have to pay for a lot of things, like lessons from a professional instructor, and of course, rent or buy special equipment such as a parachute, a jumpsuit, and a helmet. As for who I'd like to do it with, well, I'd prefer to try it on my own first. It's a risky sport, so I want to be 100% focused the first time. But if I enjoy it, maybe I could convince some friends or even my wife to try it with me. Still, it's not something that's very healthy, affordable, or practical to do regularly, so I don't think I'll turn it into a regular hobby. In fact, I might just keep it as a personal secret thrill, something I do once in a while for the adrenaline rush and pure excitement. The main reason I've always been interested in this sport is that when I was a kid, I used to dream about flying, like Superman or something. And parachuting feels like the closest thing to that. You jump out of a plane, you fall through the sky, and just before landing, you open your parachute. That must feel absolutely incredible. I think it would be a once in a lifetime experience. Well, let me start by telling you when I got that piece of technology. It was probably a few years ago when I started working as an IELTS trainer. Before that, I used a Windows laptop, which was an Asus one. However, on a very unlucky day, that poor laptop broke down. So I had no choice but to replace it with a new one. All of a sudden, I decided to go for a MacBook Pro. It wasn't a purely random decision, though. I had been thinking about it for a while because I wanted a more reliable and long lasting device. At first, it wasn't easy to use a MacBook Pro since I was so familiar with Windows. On a Windows laptop, you can easily install and uninstall applications, and the Word and Excel programs are also a lot faster. But I overcame those initial difficulties by asking my friends for help and joining some Facebook groups to get tips. I also watched YouTube videos about using macOS, tips and tricks, shortcuts, and all that. And eventually, I became really comfortable using the MacBook Pro. Now I feel very confident with it, and I know how to use it to its full potential. So yeah, that's my story. Band 9 version, natural, idiomatic, fluent. Let me kick things off by sharing when I got this piece of tech. It was a few years back, around the time I started working as an IELTS trainer. Before that, I was using a basic Windows laptop, an old Asus model. Then one day, very unlucky day actually, it suddenly broke down on me. It just stopped working, and I had no choice but to look for a replacement. That's when I finally decided to switch to a MacBook Pro. It wasn't a spontaneous decision. I'd been thinking about it for a while because I wanted something more stable and long lasting. That said, the transition wasn't smooth. I'd been using Windows my whole life, and macOS felt completely foreign at first. Simple things like installing apps or finding settings were frustrating. Plus, Word and Excel seemed to run faster on Windows, so I had a bit of buyer's remorse at the start. But I got over the learning curve by asking friends for help, joining a few Mac user groups on Facebook, and binge watching YouTube tutorials. That helped a lot. Now, I'm super comfortable with it. I can navigate it like a pro, and I honestly don't think I'd go back to Windows. The MacBook Pro has definitely grown on me. I'd like to start off by telling you who this person is. He's actually a senior man I met at a coffee shop a while ago. He happened to be a friend of my close friend, so I got introduced to him. Since I could speak English quite well, he was willing to chat with me. And to be honest, he came across as really friendly from the start. At first, we talked about simple things like family, the weather, and languages. But over time, he realized I had a decent command of English, so he shifted the conversation to deeper topics like finance and investment. That's when things got really interesting. He shared that he used to be a CEO and the founder of his own company. Although he had already retired, he had handed the business over to his son and was still very active when it came to financial knowledge. Since I'm quite interested in money and finance myself, I started asking him questions. He gave me some insightful advice on how to manage money wisely and protect its value. He introduced me to a range of investment options, like the stock market, real estate, and even gold. He emphasized the importance of owning gold, saying that it's one of the safest ways to preserve your wealth during economic downturns. According to him, gold holds its value better than most assets and gives you leverage in times of financial crisis. All in all, it was one of the most meaningful conversations I've had with a senior person. I learned a lot and felt really inspired. I'd like to start by telling you whose home it was. It belonged to a friend of mine, or actually, she was also my former manager. We had a bit of a heated disagreement, and after that, we decided to part ways professionally. So from that moment on, I was no longer her employee. That said, we've still tried to remain friends, or at least on friendly terms. You never know, right? Life in Thanhua City is pretty small, and it's quite likely that our paths will cross again at some point. So it's best to maintain a civil relationship. Anyway, not long ago, my new manager and I were invited to her house for a visit. I always knew she was quite wealthy, but I didn't expect her home to be that stunning. It was beautifully designed, really tasteful. It was a one-story house built on a single flat plot of land, and everything looked so well thought out. She must have hired a professional architect, because the layout and the aesthetics were just perfect. In front of her house, there were rows of colorful flowers and a few bonsai trees that really added to the vibe. But what really caught my attention were the warm steps leading up to her front door. I have no idea how, but the floor felt heated. Maybe there was some kind of underfloor heating system. All in all, I would say her home was absolutely second to none. I was blown away. It honestly looked like something you'd see in a Korean drama, the kind of house owned by a successful CEO. First off, I'd like to kick things off by talking about who that person was, and it was none other than my wife. As for when it happened, it was just a few months ago. My wife sat me down and insisted that I start hitting the gym more regularly, because, to be honest, I had put on quite a bit of weight. I wouldn't say I was seriously overweight, but definitely heavier than I should have been. So, what she encouraged me to do was not just exercise, but also rethink my daily routines and diet. She wanted me to lose weight and eat more healthily, in particular to cut back on sugar and greasy food and eat more greens. But here's the thing, I'm a huge fruit lover. I mean, I could live off watermelon and apples. So giving up fruit, especially sweet ones and sugary drinks, that's an uphill battle for me. Even when it comes to coffee, I always go for the version with condensed milk, Vietnamese brown coffee, because I absolutely love the flavor. Now, in terms of how I felt, I was genuinely happy. Not because I enjoyed dieting, not at all, but because I felt loved and cared for. The fact that my wife pushed me to do this showed how much she really cares about my health, and that meant the world to me. That said, if I'm being completely honest, I haven't made much progress with my weight loss goals. My sweet tooth is still my biggest weakness, so it looks like the journey is far from over. Well, I'd like to kick things off by telling you a bit about who he is. His name is Sun Tung MTP, and he's arguably one of the biggest A-list celebrities in Vietnam. He has a massive fan base and an impressive body of work. Speaking of his musical style, I'd say it leans heavily towards pop with a funky twist. He's also dabbled in rap here and there, which gives his music a fresh and modern edge. As for when I first started listening to his songs, that was quite a while ago, maybe 6 or 7 years back, when he was still a rising star. At that point, he hadn't yet reached the height of fame and was even under fire from the public and fellow artists. A lot of people accused him of being a copycat, saying he borrowed heavily from K pop, especially from G-Dragon. And to be fair, there was some truth to that. Suntung has openly expressed his admiration for G-Dragon, and you can clearly see that in his fashion sense, stage presence, and even some aspects of his music. Now, why do I like his music? Well, to put it simply, it's a vibe. His tracks are undeniably catchy. Take Em Kwangé Hom Kwa, for example. It became a massive hit, partly because of its infectious melody and partly due to Sun Tung's unique style. His outfits, his charisma, the whole package, it all left a lasting impression on fans, myself included. Highlight.
Alright, so I'm going to talk about someone I didn't really like at first but ended up becoming really close to, and that's actually my wife. Funny, right? The first time I met her, I thought she came off a bit full of herself. I mean, she didn't even acknowledge me, and when I sent her a friend request on Facebook, she just ignored it. So I figured, okay, that's that, nothing's going to happen between us. I assumed we had nothing in common, and honestly, I just let it go. But then, a few days later, out of the blue, she accepted the request and we ended up having a surprisingly great conversation. I didn't expect much, but we totally hit it off. We ended up chatting late into the night, like 2 or 3 a.m., just talking about everything, her life, her family, and all sorts of personal stuff. She was surprisingly open, and I think that's because, by then, we'd already built some kind of connection. We weren't strangers anymore, it felt like we were becoming good friends. Looking back, the whole experience was kind of bittersweet. At first, it was hard to even get her attention, but after that rocky start, things just flowed naturally. And in the end, we got married, and now we're still going strong and genuinely enjoy being around each other. Life's full of surprises, I guess. Well, I think the event I'd really love to attend is an esports tournament, specifically for Lian Quan Mobile. It's a super popular 5v5 mobile game, and honestly, I'm a big fan. The basic idea is that you team up with 4 other players, and your goal is to destroy the enemy's main base. Each player takes on a different role, like an AD carry or sniper, a jungler, a tank, or a mid laner. Everyone has their own position and responsibilities, and the key is to work together and come up with a solid strategy. You earn gold throughout the match, which you can use to buy better items, like suits, armor, or even special gear that gives you unique powers. For instance, there's an item that lets you revive once after dying, or another one that makes you invincible for a short time. What I love about the game is that it's not just about fast reflexes, it also takes real strategy and teamwork. That's why I'd be so excited to attend a live tournament. Most of the big matches take place in Ho Chi Minh City, which is quite far from where I live. The ticket itself isn't too expensive, but the travel and accommodation costs really add up. That's what's held me back so far. Still, it's definitely on my bucket list. Hopefully, one day I'll be able to go and experience the excitement in person. Watching the pros play live would be incredible.
So, I'm going to talk about Sun Tung MTP. As one of the most well-known singers in Vietnam, it's no surprise that he's always dressed to impress. One of his most iconic music videos would probably be Hai Trao Cho An. It was clearly a high-budget production. Everything from the sets to the locations looked incredibly polished. I believe it was even filmed overseas, featuring stunning beaches, crystal-clear waters, and luxury resorts. In that video, he's seen rocking designer outfits. We're talking Gucci sneakers, a luxurious robe, and some kind of scarf that looked like it was made of real animal fur. I'm not exactly sure what kind. Maybe fox? I'm not that familiar with luxury fashion, but it definitely screamed high-end. On a more casual day, you'll often catch him in something more laid back, like chunky trainers paired with high socks that match the color scheme of his outfit. Even when he's just in a basic t-shirt, he somehow pulls off a sleek, fashionable look. I guess that's what happens when you have a whole styling team behind you. Oh, and I actually once saw him at the Six Senses Hotel, which is considered a six-star resort, the only one of its kind in Vietnam, maybe even in all of Asia. All in all, Sun Tung MTP is always on point when it comes to fashion. He looks like he's stepped straight out of a style magazine or a runway catalog.
Well, I'd like to talk about a childhood friend I still remember really vividly. His name was Thuc, which is actually the Vietnamese word for food. I know it sounds funny, but that's quite typical of the way older generations used to name their children. I first met him ages ago, must have been around 15 or 20 years back, when I was living with my parents in Ha Giang province, way up in the north of Vietnam. Thinking back, Thuc was a really clever and fun guy to be around. We used to hang out all the time, and we were practically inseparable back then. One of our favorite games was hide and seek. I was about 4 or 5 years younger than him, so he always had the upper hand. He was a pro at hiding. I mean, there was this one time when it took me nearly an hour to find him. After that, I just gave up playing hide and seek with him altogether. I realized if he really wanted to hide, there was no way I'd ever find him. We usually played around Nha San, which is a traditional stilt house typical of ethnic minority groups in Vietnam. It's made mostly of wood and supported by lots of tall pillars. It made the perfect playground for kids like us. As for why I liked him so much, well, to me, he was more than just a childhood friend. Even though I called him Anh, like an older brother, he was really more like a best mate. A few years ago, I had the chance to go back to Ha Giang and meet him again. But honestly, by then, most of the memories had started to fade. I just felt this wave of nostalgia, like I had once lived a really special and memorable childhood. And he was a big part of it. These days, we don't really stay in touch. In fact, we hardly talk at all. Our lives took very different paths. He's still living and working in Ha Giang, while I've moved on and become an IELTS trainer in Tana Hoa City. But still, I'll always remember him as one of the key people who made my childhood so meaningful.
Well, if I had to talk about someone I know who's really passionate about growing plants, it would definitely be my mom. She's a primary school teacher, and since she often has a bit more free time compared to other jobs, she spends a lot of it gardening, taking care of flowers, trees, and even growing her own vegetables. She actually has quite a knack for gardening. I mean, she can nurture the tiniest seedling into a fully grown plant. It's really impressive how she can start with just a seed, carefully water it, and tend to it until it grows taller, stronger, and eventually starts to bear fruit. It's honestly like she has a magic touch when it comes to plants. That said, sometimes she takes gardening a little too seriously. My dad and I often have to complain because she spends so much time pruning, watering, and fussing over her plants that she'll sometimes be late for lunch or dinner. She just gets totally absorbed in her little green world. As for where she does her gardening, we actually have two houses, one in Ha Giang province and another in Thanh Hoa City. In Ha Giang, she has a proper garden, around 30 to 35 square meters, where she grows a wide variety of plants. Vegetables, herbs, flowers, you name it. But in Thanh Hoa, we don't really have a proper garden. There's just a small leftover patch of land behind our house. Technically, not even ours. But because she's so into gardening, she went ahead and planted vegetables there anyway. I guess that's just how crazy passionate she is about it. Honestly, in our family, she's the only one with a green thumb. Even when a plant looks like it's completely dried out or beyond saving, she somehow manages to bring it back to life. It's kind of amazing to watch. She just really knows what she's doing when it comes to plants.
All right, so I'm going to describe a popular place for sports that I know quite well. Let me start by telling you where it is. It's actually really close to where I live, just a short walk from TEPCO Complex, which is my apartment building. I'd say it takes around 3 or 4 minutes on foot to get there. Now, I'm not sure it officially counts as a stadium because it's quite small. It's basically just a local football pitch, and instead of real grass, the field is covered with artificial turf. You know, that thin plastic grass that's bright green and looks kind of like the real thing, but definitely isn't. You can probably picture it. The place is usually buzzing with activity, especially in the evenings. A lot of people gather there to play football. It's definitely the most popular sport in the area. Personally, I don't go there to watch matches or anything like that. I just like to stroll around the field, get some fresh air, and unwind a bit after a long day. As for the kind of people who usually go there, it's quite a mixed crowd. You'll often see groups of high school students forming teams and playing some pretty competitive matches. Other times, it's office workers blowing off steam after work. In Vietnam, it's actually quite common for people to play football before dinner, and sometimes afterwards, they'll head out for a drink or two. It's almost like a little after work ritual. And finally, how do I feel about the place? Well, to be honest, it's nothing fancy or special, but it feels familiar, and I always feel relaxed whenever I'm there. That said, I do prefer natural green spaces. Parks or grassy areas with real trees and plants over a football field covered in plastic turf, but still, it's a nice spot to hang out and breathe for a while.
All right, I'd like to talk about someone I know who comes from a different cultural background. Well, to be honest, it's not completely different, but he's from an ethnic minority group in Vietnam, which still counts, I guess. His name is Tuk, which actually means food in Vietnamese. Kind of a funny name, but pretty common in rural areas where names are often chosen for their simplicity. I met him when I was really young, maybe 15 or even 20 years ago, back when I was living with my parents in Ha Giang province, way up in the north of Vietnam. Tuk is from the Thai ethnic group, which is one of the many minority communities in our country. I think Vietnam has about 54 recognized ethnic groups, and he belongs to one of them. He's bilingual. He speaks both Vietnamese and Dai, his mother tongue. I still remember how he used to teach me some basic phrases in his language. At that time, I actually got quite good at it. I guess I've always had a bit of a knack for languages, which probably explains why I later became an IELTS trainer. I think my ability to mimic sounds and pick up accents has helped me a lot in my own language learning journey. Honestly, I owe a lot to him. He was the one who sparked that interest in me. That said, I've forgotten almost everything he taught me. These days, I can barely remember how to say hello or goodbye in Thai. But still, those memories really stuck with me. We were super close as kids. He used to take me to the cornfields, and we'd spend hours just playing together. We'd play hide and seek, go fishing in small streams, or even hunt for insects in the rice paddies. That was our version of fun back then. No smartphones, no internet, just pure outdoor adventures.
Okay, so I'd like to talk about a time when I received quite a bit of money as gifts, and that was none other than my wedding day. I got married around 4 years ago, and as you could imagine, it was a huge milestone in my life, the day my wife and I officially tied the knot. In Vietnam, it's traditional for guests to give money as wedding gifts. Some people even call it lucky money, and it's a really common practice here. On that day, aside from cash, I also received a few gold rings from my father-in-law and some money from my own parents. It was honestly a joyful and memorable event. Now, in terms of how I felt, I'd say I was both happy and kind of in debt. Let me explain. In Vietnamese culture, when someone gives you a generous gift at your wedding, it's sort of expected that you'll return the favor when it's their turn to get married. So for friends or relatives who weren't married yet but gave me money or gold, I knew I'd have to give back the same or even more when they tie the knot. That's especially true with gold. Among close family and friends, we often give each other gold instead of cash because gold tends to keep its value over time. If you give someone a certain amount of money now and they get married 5 years later, the value of that same amount might have dropped due to inflation. But gold doesn't really lose its value like that, so it's a more meaningful and practical gift in the long run. So yeah, receiving all that money in gold made me feel lucky, but it also reminded me of my future responsibilities.
Okay, so I'd like to talk about a time when I saw a shocking amount of plastic waste. And that was at Som Sien Beach, a fairly popular beach near where I live. It's located about 10 kilometers from the city center, so it only takes me around 30 to 40 minutes to get there. My wife and I often visit the beach because it's nearby, the sea breeze is refreshing, and if I'm in the mood to splurge on seafood, I can enjoy a pretty decent meal with fresh shrimp and squid. Now, moving on to when I noticed all the plastic waste, it was during one of our weekend trips not long ago. As usual, I headed straight toward the shoreline, and that's when I saw loads of rubbish scattered along the coast. There were plastic bags, empty bottles, bits of fishing nets, and a whole lot more. It was honestly a bit heartbreaking. I think the main reason for this is that many tourists don't take responsibility for cleaning up after themselves. People bring food in plastic containers or bags, and once they're done eating, instead of packing up their rubbish, they just leave it behind. It's lazy and disrespectful, in my opinion. This kind of pollution has become such a problem that some schools have started organizing cleanup activities and encouraging students to volunteer at Sumsian Beach. I really think that's a great way to raise awareness. But aside from volunteer work, I also believe there should be stricter regulations in place. Like if someone is caught littering, they should be fined right on the spot. That kind of punishment would definitely make people think twice before tossing their plastic waste around. So yeah, seeing all that plastic really opened my eyes. It made me realize how serious the issue is and how badly we need to protect our beaches.
Well, I'd like to describe an outdoor activity I did recently in a new place. But first, I should mention that I'm not really into outdoor activities. I know that might not sound great for my health, but I just don't spend much time running around or being physically active like I used to a few years ago. Anyway, the activity I want to talk about was a team building event that took place at Samson Beach not too long ago. Like I said, I'm not the sporty type, but since my company organized this trip, I didn't really have a choice. I had to join in. We were split into 3 or 4 teams with around 10 to 12 people in each. The games were the typical ones you'd expect at a team building event. Stuff like piggyback races, grabbing flags, and relay challenges. One game in particular really stood out. It was the final round that decided which team had to pay for the group meal afterwards. So obviously the pressure was on. During that game, I gave it my all. I ended up carrying one of my teammates, a girl, on my back and sprinting as fast as I could. Unfortunately, I pushed myself too hard and ended up with a pretty painful back injury. I could barely walk or stand up straight for a while after that. Looking back, I think the injury happened partly because I'm not in good shape. I don't have much stamina, and I'm not used to doing intense physical activities, especially ones that involve both strength and speed. So, yeah, that was a memorable day for sure. Fun, but also painful. It did make me realize I should probably take better care of my body.
All right, I'm going to talk about a sport I really enjoyed when I was a kid. This goes way back to my primary school days, when I was living with my grandparents in a rural area. To give you a bit of context, life in the countryside didn't offer many options for entertainment. So, like most boys in my village, I spent a lot of time playing football, or soccer as some people call it. There were plenty of rice fields around, and after harvest season, those fields would turn into empty patches of land, perfect makeshift football pitches for us. We didn't have any fancy equipment. We just set up 2 wooden sticks as goalposts and used cheap plastic balls to play. Leather footballs were out of the question, too expensive and hard to find. We usually split into 2 teams, around 9 or 10 players each. Now, I'll be honest, I wasn't the fastest or the most skillful player, so I was always placed as a defender. You know, the guy whose job was to stop others from scoring. I didn't mind though. I wasn't cut out to be a striker, and being a defender felt a bit easier for me. Looking back, those were really fun times. But nowadays, I don't really play football anymore, partly because I'm not that great at team sports, and honestly, I don't like being reminded of how bad I was back then. Instead, I prefer individual sports like swimming or taekwondo, a Korean martial art. I think I perform better when I don't have to rely on or coordinate with teammates. Solo sports just suit me more.
All right, I'd like to talk about a photo I took that I'm really proud of. It was a picture I took of my wife during a trip we made to Chang'an, a tourist destination roughly 100 to 150 kilometers away from Tanhua City. We went there with a few other couples, 3 or 4 families in total, and we had an amazing time together. On our way back home, we stopped by this beautiful spot that had a pagoda and a river flowing beside it. Actually, I'm not entirely sure whether it was a river or just a large stream, but it was fairly wide, so I'd say it was probably a river. Anyway, my wife was standing in front of the pagoda, leaning slightly against a row of concrete posts. She crossed one leg over the other and struck a pose that I thought looked really elegant and natural. I used my iPhone 13 Pro Max to take the photo, and to make sure I got the perfect shot, I snapped about 5 or 6 pictures from different angles. Later, I edited the photo a little, adjusted the brightness, sharpened the image a bit so that her features stood out more, and then I sent her all the photos to let her pick the one she liked best. She ended up loving one of them, and that made me feel really proud, like I had captured the moment just right. So yeah, that's a photo I'll always remember. Not just because it turned out great, but because it was taken during such a fun and memorable trip.
All right, I'd like to describe an object that I find really beautiful. It's a wooden sculpture of a goat that was given to me by my brother-in-law. He gave it to me as a gift a few years ago, and I absolutely love it. The main reason I find it beautiful is because it looks incredibly realistic. The craftsmanship is amazing. The sculptor captured every detail so well, from the goat's horns and its little goatee to the texture of its fur. It almost looks like a real goat, just frozen in time. I usually keep this statue on my work desk, and every time I look at it, I feel a sense of calm and inspiration. One reason it's special to me is that I was born in the year of the goat, 1991, and in Vietnamese culture, your zodiac animal is believed to reflect your personality. So in a way, the goat is like my spirit animal. Also, the sculpture is carved from a single block of wood, not made from separate pieces stuck together. The surface feels really smooth to the touch, and you can tell it was carefully hand-carved with a lot of precision. That craftsmanship adds to its beauty and value in my eyes. Another reason why I love it is a bit more playful. You know, in English, GOAT is an acronym for greatest of all time. So it sort of reminds me of my personal motto, that I should try to be so good at what I do that people can't ignore me. Now, I understand that not everyone would see it the same way. Some younger people might think it looks old-fashioned or boring. But for those who appreciate woodwork or enjoy collecting handcrafted items, I'm sure they'd find it just as beautiful as I do.
All right. I'd like to describe a problem I had while going shopping not too long ago. A few weeks back, I decided to buy a new pair of khaki pants. And yes, it's a pair of khaki pants, since pants is always plural in English. So I'm not really into fashion, to be honest. I usually just wear the same pair of jeans almost every day. That's why my wife started complaining and told me I needed to get something new. She said I looked a bit lazy and repetitive. I figured khaki pants would be a good choice because they feel comfortable and they're quite versatile. You can pair them with a polo shirt, a dress shirt, trainers, or even formal shoes. They work well for both casual and semi-formal occasions. Anyway, I went to a clothing store and tried on a few options. After some time, I finally found a pair that fit me well and had that classic light yellow khaki color. But here's where the problem started. The pants were too long, so I asked the staff if they could shorten them. To my surprise, they told me I'd have to come back the next day to pick them up. I was honestly a bit annoyed because I thought it would only take a couple of hours. I was in a bit of a rush and didn't want to make another trip. I just didn't understand why a simple alteration had to take so long. I expected better service. So in the end, I chose not to buy them at all. I just didn't feel like waiting or coming back again. To be honest, I prefer getting things done quickly. That applies not just to shopping, but also to how I work. If I have something on my to-do list, I want to finish it as soon as possible so I can enjoy more free time. And that mindset definitely influenced my reaction during that shopping trip.
All right, I'd like to talk about an advertisement that I really disliked. Actually, I found it extremely irritating. It was this YouTube ad for some kind of herbal medicine, and I used to see it all the time, over and over again. It felt like every time I opened a video, bam, there it was.
What annoyed me most was the repetition. The same ad would pop up constantly, during lunch, while watching a video for relaxation, or even in the middle of a work break. And the worst part? You couldn't skip it. You just had to sit through the whole thing. The content of the ad was also pretty off-putting. They claimed that their herbal remedy had been developed over 3 generations, which I found hard to believe. Honestly, I don't fall for those kinds of exaggerated claims anymore. What made things worse was the way they openly mentioned very sensitive health issues, like skin rashes, psoriasis, even problems related to private parts. They literally said things like, "This can cure issues with your genitals," in the middle of the ad. That's not something people want blasting through their speakers, especially if you're sitting next to someone or in a public place. I remember once I was in a work meeting playing a quick video during a break, and suddenly that ad started playing. It was beyond embarrassing. I honestly don't know how that kind of content managed to pass YouTube's ad policies. Maybe the advertisers found a way to trick the algorithm or bypass the filters. Luckily, after a while, I think enough people complained about it, and eventually the ad was taken down. It was such a relief when it disappeared. I just hope platforms like YouTube will tighten their ad regulations in the future to avoid things like that happening again.
All right, I'd like to talk about a gift I received that I really wanted, and it was given to me by none other than my wife. After we got married, my wife and I received quite a bit of money from friends and relatives as wedding gifts. One day, she asked me what I'd like to buy for myself, something special to mark the occasion. It didn't take me long to answer. I told her I'd always wanted a beautiful Swiss watch, specifically one from Atlantic Watch, a classic Swiss-made brand known for its timeless designs. So we went to a store called Dong Quang Watch, which is quite well known in Vietnam for selling genuine timepieces. When we got there, a friendly sales assistant welcomed us, and after browsing around for a while, I found exactly what I was looking for. The watch that caught my eye had a black dial and a sleek leather strap. It wasn't an automatic watch, it was a quartz watch, which I actually prefer. Personally, I find quartz watches more convenient because they're accurate and I don't have to reset the time or keep moving to keep them running. Some people may prefer automatic watches for the craftsmanship, but for me, practicality matters more. Even though my wife and I picked it out together and technically used our shared money, I still consider it a gift from her because she was the one who encouraged me to get something meaningful for myself. I've been wearing that watch for a few years now, and it's still working perfectly. I've had to replace the battery a couple of times, and more recently, I changed the leather strap to a metal one, which actually gave it a brand new look. To this day, it's one of my favorite possessions, not just because it looks good and works well, but because it came from someone I love, and it reminds me of a very special time in my life.
All right, I'd like to talk about a piece of good news I heard about a close friend of mine. I found out through a mutual friend that he had just moved from living in an apartment to buying and living in a standalone house, which in my opinion is a huge milestone. I was genuinely happy for him because, as you probably know, switching from an apartment to a private house is a big deal, especially in Vietnam. Not many people can afford it since landed houses are usually far more expensive than apartments. We've been close friends for many years, so when I heard the news, I didn't hesitate to visit him. We had dinner together, some really nice seafood, and after that, he gave me a tour around his new home. I was quite impressed. The house was fully equipped and beautifully decorated. It's a 3-story house, which is quite different from living in an apartment. In apartments, everything is on one level, so it's more convenient in terms of movement. But in a house like his, you have to go up and down stairs, which might not be ideal for everyone, especially older people. So in a way, he's traded convenience for ownership of land. In Vietnam, that actually means a lot. If you own a house, you own the land beneath it, and that ownership is usually permanent. You can pass it down to your children or future generations. On the other hand, when you buy an apartment, you typically have a 50-year lease, which means it's not really considered a forever home by many people, especially the older generation. So yeah, I was truly happy for him. It wasn't just good news. It was a big step forward in his life, and I was proud to see him achieve that.
All right, I'd like to talk about a time when I had to share something with someone. In this case, it was a room that I shared with a friend and coworker. This happened around 3 or 4 years ago when I was working at the Lute Hotel Hanoi, a five-star hotel in the capital. Since I'm not originally from Hanoi and didn't own any property there, I had to find a practical way to live affordably. That's why I ended up sharing a rented room with a close friend of mine who also happened to be my colleague. We rented a room on the second floor of a house, and the monthly rent was around 8 million VND. By splitting the cost, I was able to save a lot of money, which was incredibly helpful at the time. Of course, there were both benefits and drawbacks to this arrangement. On the positive side, aside from the financial savings, it was nice to live with someone I knew well. We could hang out, eat together, and even share household chores. However, I had to sacrifice some privacy. For instance, there were times when I wanted to invite friends over, but I had to think about whether it would bother him. And the same applied to him. He couldn't just bring his girlfriend over without considering how I might feel. We also had a few minor conflicts. I'm the kind of person who likes to go to bed early, while he preferred staying up late listening to music or even going out for late-night snacks. So we occasionally disagreed on things like noise or lights at night. That said, we got along pretty well overall. Since we were both guys, we didn't take things too personally. We were open with each other and always tried to communicate instead of bottling things up. Even though there were a few rough patches in the beginning, we eventually found a rhythm that worked for both of us. All in all, it was a meaningful experience. It taught me the importance of compromise, communication, and mutual respect, all of which are crucial when sharing anything with someone else.
All right. I'd like to talk about a time when I needed to search for some information online. This happened just a few weeks ago, when one of my students told me she wanted to apply to a university in Singapore. Now, I'm an IELTS trainer, so I'm familiar with English exams and interviews, but I didn't know much about that particular university's admission process, especially when it came to their entrance exam and interview format. So I went online and started doing some research. I found out that applicants were required to take a test that was quite similar to the SAT, which includes sections on math, logical reasoning, and reading comprehension. I felt confident about helping her with reading and interview skills, things like how to present herself, speak clearly, and sound confident in English. That part was within my expertise. But the math section? That was a different story. I've never been good at math, and the more I looked into it, the more overwhelmed I felt. There were tons of resources out there, websites, practice questions, tips and tricks, but I wasn't sure which ones were reliable. It felt like trying to find a needle in a haystack. Eventually, I decided to ask my manager for advice. After discussing it, I realized it would be better for the student to get support from someone who specializes in math. So I stepped back and focused on preparing her for the English-related parts of the application. In the end, everything seemed to go smoothly on her end. She hasn't received the final result yet, so I'm still waiting to find out how it all turned out. But I'm glad I was able to help her in the areas I knew well, and I learned that sometimes it's okay to admit your limits and ask for help. All right, I'd like to talk about someone who really inspired me to do something meaningful. And interestingly, that person isn't real. He's actually a character from a martial arts novel. I've always been a huge fan of wuxia and xianxia stories. You know, the kinds where the main characters cultivate power, fight evil, and sometimes even strive for immortality. I've read countless novels in this genre, but one character really left a lasting impression on me. His name is Vlung Lum, a Vietnamese transliterated name from one of the most popular xianxia series I've ever read. Vlung Lum came from a very humble background. He was born into a poor family, and early in the story, his family was mistreated and taken advantage of. I think by his uncle or maybe another relative. I don't remember the exact details because the series was massive, over 2,000 chapters long. But what truly inspired me was how he never gave up, no matter how bad things got. He trained hard, pushed himself to the limit, and eventually became one of the most powerful cultivators in the entire story universe. Along the way, he got revenge on those who wronged him, stayed loyal to his teachers, and even married the person he loved. After finishing the story, I felt incredibly motivated. His journey made me want to push myself harder, stay resilient, and improve every day. Like him, I want to do something extraordinary with my life, not for fame, so I can one day support and protect the people I care about. Even though he's just a fictional character, his story had a powerful impact on me. It reminded me that no matter where you start in life, with enough determination and effort, you can achieve something truly great.
All right, I'd like to talk about a time when I had a disagreement with a close friend of mine. Now, generally speaking, I'm not someone who enjoys arguments. I usually avoid conflict whenever possible because, in many cases, arguing doesn't lead to anything productive, especially if the topic isn't work-related or particularly important. However, there was one time when I had a minor disagreement with one of my closest friends. He strongly believed that I should buy a standalone house instead of living in an apartment. He argued that apartments come with too many drawbacks. For example, in Vietnam, apartment ownership typically only lasts about 50 years, while a house can be owned permanently and passed down to future generations. I told him I actually agreed with that point. In theory, if I had the financial means, I'd absolutely prefer to own a house. But realistically, given my limited budget, I think living in an apartment is a more practical choice at this stage in my life. I also pointed out that apartments offer several benefits, especially when it comes to security and convenience. For instance, if a neighbor plays loud music or sings karaoke late at night, there are usually security guards who can step in and handle the situation. In contrast, if I were living in a house, I'd have to deal with those issues on my own and possibly pay more for a smaller living space. So, even though we had different perspectives, we both made valid points. He still believed that a house is the better investment long-term, and I still felt that an apartment suits my current lifestyle and budget better. In the end, it was just a friendly disagreement. We didn't take it personally, and we both respected each other's views, which I think is the most important part when dealing with any kind of disagreement.
All right, I'd like to talk about a TV program that I'm absolutely hooked on. It's a nature documentary series. I honestly can't remember the exact title, but it's one of those BBC-style programs that explores wildlife, the animal kingdom, and different species around the globe. I've always been a big fan of this kind of show, and for good reason. First off, it's incredibly informative. You get to learn a great deal about how animals live in the wild, how they hunt for food, interact with each other, find mates, and adapt to their environments. Even though I'm not particularly fascinated by the mating habits of animals, I still think it's part and parcel of nature, so it's interesting in its own right. What really draws me in, though, is the narration. The voiceover is absolutely spot on, delivered in a calm, clear British accent, which gives the whole thing a very polished, almost poetic feel. The pace is slower than most native speakers, which actually makes it ideal for language learners like me. The narrator has a way of telling the story that captures my attention and sparks my imagination. It's like you're right there in the middle of the jungle or deep in the ocean. From a language learning perspective, this show is a gold mine. As an IELTS trainer myself, I find it super helpful. I often turn it on, listen closely, and even shadow the narrator, repeating after him to improve my pronunciation, intonation, and vocabulary. It's become a part of my daily routine, and I genuinely feel it's made a difference in how I speak. That said, mimicking a native British accent is easier said than done. I've tried, but to be honest, it still feels a bit out of reach. Even so, I'll keep trying. Not to sound exactly British, but to sound clearer and more natural. All in all, this program ticks all the boxes. It's educational, entertaining, and inspiring. I can totally see myself watching it for years to come.
All right, I'd like to share a daily routine that I genuinely enjoy, and that's none other than having a cup of coffee in the morning. I know it might sound a bit ordinary to some people, but for me, it's one of life's simple pleasures. I've always believed that it's important to strike a healthy work-life balance, and part of that means making time for small rituals that bring you joy. Every morning, I like to go to a local cafe, sip my coffee slowly, and listen to some relaxing music. It's a moment I carve out for myself before the hustle and bustle of the day begins. This little routine does wonders for my mental clarity and overall well-being. From a health perspective, coffee actually has some surprising benefits. It's rich in antioxidants, which help fight off harmful cells in the body, and it keeps me alert and focused for hours. That means I'm usually much more productive and concentrated throughout the day. But beyond the science, it's really about the experience. The aroma, the warmth of the cup in my hand, and the bold flavor. I just love everything about it. I know it's not the healthiest habit, but I also tend to pair it with a cigarette. I have to admit, coffee and a smoke, it's a combo that feels incredibly relaxing to me. Of course, I'm well aware that I should eventually quit smoking, and I do have plans to phase it out in the long run, but for now, I find that it helps me unwind and reset. So, all in all, this simple morning routine helps me start my day on the right foot, and I really can't imagine my mornings without it.
All right, I'd like to talk about a time when I made a complaint after receiving poor service, and thankfully it was handled quite well. A few weeks ago, my wife and I went to a BBQ restaurant. It was either Korean or Japanese, I couldn't quite tell. The interior had a black and red theme, along with some Asian symbols I didn't recognize. At first, everything went smoothly, but once the food arrived and we started grilling, I noticed something was off. The charcoal provided was barely enough. It wasn't hot enough to cook the meat properly. Since it was a BBQ restaurant, I naturally expected a strong, steady flame to grill the meat evenly. Instead, it was taking forever, and the meat remained half raw. So I called over one of the waiters and politely raised the issue. To their credit, within just 3 or 4 minutes, he came back with a fresh batch of hot charcoal and refilled the grill. That quick response definitely made a difference. Initially, I was a bit disappointed that they hadn't checked the charcoal setup beforehand. I felt like this was something they should have anticipated, rather than waiting for a customer to complain. But on the bright side, they handled the situation well and were open to feedback, which I really appreciated. So, all things considered, I'd say I was satisfied with how it turned out. It wasn't a flawless experience, but I admired how they took responsibility and acted promptly. That kind of service mindset is something I value in any business. Still, if I'm being honest, I hope I never have to make that complaint again. It would be nice if they got it right the first time.
All right, I'd like to talk about a goal I set for myself, or actually 2 goals that I'm still working hard to achieve. The first one is about language learning. As an IELTS trainer, a lot of people assume I aim for top scores or academic achievements. But to be honest, my personal goal has always been to speak English as naturally and fluently as a native speaker. I don't necessarily care about test scores like 8.0 or 9.0. For me, if I can sound natural, use idiomatic expressions, and communicate smoothly, that would be more satisfying than any number on a certificate. Honestly, even if I scored a 6 or 7 but sounded like a native speaker, I'd still be over the moon. Of course, I know this isn't something that happens overnight. It's a long-term commitment, and I'm still far from where I want to be. But I try to stay consistent. I listen to English news or podcasts daily and shadow native speakers to improve my pronunciation, rhythm, and tone. It's not easy, but I enjoy the process and I'm determined to keep at it. My second goal is more personal. I want to get back in shape. I've put on a bit of weight recently, and both my wife and my mom have been reminding me, not so subtly, that I should cut down on sugar and processed food. I have a major sweet tooth, especially for fruit like mangoes or watermelons, which probably explains a lot. So now I'm trying to watch my diet, exercise more, and hopefully shed a few kilos in the coming months. It's not just about looks. I genuinely want to feel healthier and more energetic. So yeah, these are the 2 goals I'm currently pursuing: improving my spoken English to near native level and getting myself back on track health-wise. They both take time and effort, but I believe with consistency and the right mindset, I'll get there.
All right. I'd like to talk about a health-related article I came across online that really caught my attention. I read it on a website called scionews.com, and the topic was something I'd never heard of before: active resting. The article suggested that in order to stay healthy, fit, and energized, we shouldn't always rest passively, like lying down on the sofa or dozing off on the bed. Instead, we should engage in active forms of rest, which can benefit our posture, flexibility, and even circulation. One example it gave was the Asian squat, where instead of sitting on a chair, you squat down with your feet flat on the ground, like many people in East Asia often do. According to the article, this position helps engage multiple muscle groups and keeps the body aligned in a more natural way. At first, I thought it sounded strange, but also kind of genius. Another claim that really blew my mind was that modern comforts like leather sofas and soft mattresses may actually be doing more harm than good. The article explained that these overly cushioned surfaces can negatively impact our spine alignment and skeletal structure, especially if we spend long hours lying or sitting on them. I had never thought about that before. Like most people, I enjoy sinking into a soft bed or relaxing on a comfy couch. But after reading the article, I started questioning whether too much comfort might come at a cost. So I decided to give active resting a try. I tried squatting for a few minutes, and wow, it was way harder than I expected. My legs were shaking, and after about 30 seconds, I gave up. It turns out that it's a lot easier said than done. As much as I respect the science behind it, I couldn't keep it up. All in all, though, I found the article really eye-opening. Even though I couldn't put the advice into practice long-term, it definitely made me more aware of my posture and daily habits. It's one of those reads that really sticks with you.
All right, I'd like to talk about a film that never fails to make me laugh, and that's the animated movie version of Doraemon. Even though I'm in my 30s, I still enjoy watching Doraemon, especially the full-length films based on the original series. The main characters, Nobita, Shizuka, Giant, and Suneo, are absolutely iconic, and their personalities are both nostalgic and hilarious. My wife and I often watch Doraemon together while we're having lunch. It's kind of our little habit. We'll put on something lighthearted and binge a few episodes or a film while we eat. Honestly, good food and a bit of comedy is the perfect combo for us. What I love most about the movie is how simple yet creative the storyline is. It usually starts with Nobita getting into some sort of trouble. Maybe he's been bullied by Giant again, or he's failed another test, and then he runs to Doraemon for help. Doraemon, being the robot cat from the future, always pulls out a magical gadget from his pouch to save the day. One time, he gave Nobita a special phone that could make anything come through. All Nobita had to do was speak into it, and his wishes would instantly become reality. So, of course, Nobita goes a little overboard. He asks for huge piles of money because he's tired of being poor. But instead of solving his problems, it backfires hilariously. The world turns upside down. People start throwing away money, giving up their gold, and even abandoning real estate. The whole situation becomes chaotic, and it had me laughing out loud. The humor is simple, but it's so well done that it still cracks me up, even after watching it multiple times. I think part of the charm is how relatable the characters are, especially Nobita, who's always messing up, but somehow finds a way through with a bit of help and a lot of heart. All in all, Doraemon is a film series that always lifts my mood. It's light, it's funny, and it brings back childhood memories. And that's why it's so special to me.
All right, I'd like to talk about an advertisement I saw recently that introduced a product I'd never seen before. It was a luxury product by Gucci, and to be honest, I'm still not entirely sure what to call it. But it looked like a high-end trunk or chest, almost like something you'd see in old-fashioned treasure hunts. The design was unique. It was crafted from wood with an elegant finish, and it had this luxurious, almost showpiece vibe. What made it so special was its multifunctionality. Inside the trunk, there was a complete set of teacups and some other accessories. And surprisingly, the trunk could be transformed into a makeshift table. In the advertisement, they showed an architect taking this product to a construction site, unfolding it, and instantly turning it into a table. I remember thinking, who on earth would bring such a pricey Gucci item to a construction site? The ad didn't stop there. Apparently, the trunk also contained a foldable leather stool, which you could pull out and set up in seconds. So, from what seemed like a decorative wooden trunk, you could create a compact workspace, complete with a table and seating. It was clever and stylish, but also a little over the top. What completely blew my mind was the price. It was astronomically expensive, on par with the cost of a Mercedes-Benz C300. I remember shaking my head and thinking, who would ever buy this piece of furniture? Maybe the target customers are ultra-wealthy individuals who don't even blink at spending such amounts. Or maybe it's just a prototype to showcase Gucci's craftsmanship and luxury branding. Either way, the whole concept was both fascinating and absurd to me.
All right, I'd like to talk about something really important that I learned, not in school or university, but from a friend of mine. This happened a few years ago when I was having noodles at a casual restaurant with one of my close friends. He's actually a year younger than me, but on that day, he taught me a lesson I still carry with me. So we ordered a bowl of boon, and as usual, I instinctively reached for the chili paste and added a generous spoonful to my bowl, just like I always did. I've always enjoyed spicy food, and for me, a bit of heat really kicks things up a notch and excites the taste buds. But then, my friend paused and said something that really caught me off guard. He told me, "You should always taste the broth first before adding anything." He explained that if I didn't try the original flavor, how would I know how much chili or seasoning I actually needed? At first, it sounded like such a small thing, but the more he explained, the deeper it got. He said that a lot of people, not just with food, but with life in general, act on impulse or habit without taking time to assess the situation. His point was, don't rush to change something before you even know what it really is. That really stuck with me. He went on to say that sometimes we need to be more intentional with our actions. Instead of going on autopilot, we should try to approach things more thoughtfully and systematically. And I have to admit, I'd never thought about it that way before. At the time, I was a bit confused, but the more I reflected on it, the more it made sense. Now I see that lesson as a metaphor for life. So many of us make decisions out of habit without evaluating our choices or asking ourselves whether what we're doing truly makes sense. Since then, I've tried to apply that mindset not just to food, but to how I approach work, relationships, and even goals. It might sound like a small moment, but it taught me something I'd never learned in a classroom.
All right. I'd like to talk about a historical period that I've always been curious about, even though, to be honest, I'm not a huge fan of history. In fact, I used to find history painfully boring when I was a student. I often zoned out during lessons or skipped them altogether. But there's one period that genuinely piqued my interest, and that's the Tron Dynasty in Vietnamese history. I know it might sound a bit strange, but hear me out. What fascinates me about this period is a very unusual and controversial practice that supposedly took place back then. Royal family members marrying in their own bloodline. I mean, it wasn't just cousins marrying each other. There were stories of sisters marrying brothers or nieces marrying uncles, all within the same royal family. At first, I found this quite shocking and honestly disturbing. But as I looked deeper into the logic behind it, it kind of made sense in a historical context. The ruling family wanted to protect their power and wealth, and one way to do that was by avoiding any political alliances that could threaten their dynasty. If a king or queen had married someone from another noble family, that outsider could eventually seize control or influence royal decisions, which they obviously wanted to avoid at all costs. That said, this practice came at a tremendous cost. There are accounts suggesting that many members of the royal family suffered from genetic disorders or died young, possibly as a result of inbreeding. I'm not a historian or a scientist, but I think there might be some truth to it. So, the reason I want to learn more about the Turan dynasty is to understand how long that practice lasted, what social or political impact it had, and whether the public was aware of it or just accepted it as normal. Even though I used to sleep through history classes, this topic always stayed in the back of my mind, not just because of the shocking traditions, but also because it shows how far people were willing to go to hold on to power.
All right, I'd like to talk about someone I once met who had a very distinctive fashion style. A singer I saw performing at a bar called Nan Ki Khoi Nia in Ho Chi Minh City. That name roughly translates to something like Southern Uprising, if I'm not mistaken. So, about this singer, what really struck me was his appearance. To be honest, I wasn't quite sure how to describe him at first. He seemed to identify as male, but he definitely had a very flamboyant and gender-fluid sense of style. I don't want to make any assumptions or sound offensive, but based on his overall look and vibe, I'd guess he's part of the LGBTQ plus community, which is totally fine by me. In fact, I admire his confidence. Now, the way he dressed was anything but ordinary. For starters, he often wore super skinny jeans, like really tight, almost like leggings. Nowadays, most guys prefer more relaxed or comfortable fits, like cargo pants or khakis, so seeing someone rock ultra-tight jeans definitely stood out. Sometimes he even wore tight leather pants, which made quite a bold fashion statement, but what caught my attention the most was his choice of tops. He liked to wear cropped shirts that showed off his midriff, and you could even see his belly button piercing, which added to his edgy look. And let's not forget his hair, bright red, almost like the color of lipstick. It was so vivid that it instantly turned heads. He paired this whole outfit with accessories and sometimes wore makeup too, which gave off a very performance art vibe. Even though his clothing was unconventional, and some people might have raised their eyebrows, once he started singing, everyone was completely blown away. His voice was absolutely amazing. It was so powerful and emotional that it gave me goosebumps. To be honest, I think his unique fashion choices were part of his personality and his identity. Maybe it was his way of expressing himself and making a statement about self-acceptance or LGBTQ plus pride. Whatever the case, I really respected the way he owned his style and performed with such passion. So, all in all, while his clothes were definitely out of the ordinary, his talent was undeniable, and the combination made him truly unforgettable.
All right. I'd love to share with you a place in my country that I would highly recommend to any visitor or traveler, and that's none other than Ha Giang Province, where I had the chance to live for a few years. Ha Giang is tucked away in the far north of Vietnam, right up by the border. And what makes it so special is its breathtaking natural beauty combined with a peaceful, authentic atmosphere. First off, let's talk about the climate. In the summer, it's pleasantly warm and sunny, not unbearably hot like in the south. But in winter, it gets absolutely freezing. Strangely enough, that's when Ha Giang truly comes alive. You'll find delicate peach blossoms and white buckwheat flowers blooming everywhere. It's like nature is showing off its finest artwork. Another thing that Ha Giang is famous for is its terraced rice fields. These stunning golden fields are layered like a staircase, climbing up the mountains. It's as if you're stepping into a painting. Tourists from all over the country and even the world come here just to snap photos, soak in the views, and breathe in the crisp mountain air. And of course, I can't leave out the food. What sets Ha Giang's cuisine apart is its simplicity and purity. Locals don't overload dishes with seasoning. Instead, they let the ingredients speak for themselves. Whether it's boiled vegetables or local herbs, every bite feels fresh, earthy, and full of flavor. What I appreciate most about Ha Giang, though, is that it's not overrun by tourists. Unlike popular destinations like Da Nang or Nha Trang, Ha Giang still feels untouched and off the beaten path. If you're looking for a quiet getaway where you can truly reconnect with nature and yourself, this is the place to be. All in all, Ha Giang has a special place in my heart, and I'd recommend it to anyone seeking a meaningful and memorable travel experience in Vietnam. Trust me, it's not just worth visiting, it's worth coming back to.
All right. I'd like to talk about a place in my country that is seriously affected by pollution, especially air pollution, and that's none other than Hanoi, the capital of Vietnam. Now, if you've ever been to Hanoi, you'll probably agree with me that pollution is a major issue there. From early morning till midnight, the air is thick with dust and smog. And dust is just the beginning. What's even more concerning is the sheer volume of exhaust fumes coming from cars, buses, motorbikes, and trucks. The traffic never lets up, and as a result, the air often feels heavy and choked with pollutants. To make matters worse, Hanoi is surrounded by agricultural areas where farmers often burn their haystacks or crop residues after harvest. While this is a traditional farming practice meant to fertilize the soil, it sends huge clouds of smoke billowing into the air. These plumes of smoke drift into the city and get trapped in the urban atmosphere, making the air even more difficult to breathe. I still remember seeing columns of white smoke just hanging in the air, especially during the dry season. For many people, particularly children and the elderly, this can be extremely suffocating and even dangerous. Personally, I find it really hard to tolerate that level of pollution. On some days, I can literally feel my lungs struggling after spending just an hour outside. So honestly, it didn't come as a surprise to me when I read that Hanoi was listed as one of the most polluted cities in the world. It's a serious concern that definitely needs more attention. Not just from the government, but from all of us as citizens.
All right, I'd like to talk about a new development in the area where I live, and that's none other than Hoi An Park, a beautiful spot right in the heart of Taighua City. Interestingly, this park is named after Hoi An, a well-known ancient town in Da Nang, which is extremely popular among both local and international tourists. The reason behind the name, as far as I know, is that Taighua and Hoi An share a special bond, possibly some kind of partnership or cultural collaboration between the two provinces. So, in a way, naming the park after Hoi An is a way to celebrate that relationship. Now, if we go back about 5 years, the area where Hoi An Park now stands was just a typical local park, nothing fancy. There were lots of trees, a few winding paths, and a small pond in the middle. People would go there to practice Tai Chi, do yoga, or just hang out and skateboard. It was a peaceful space, but definitely not something to write home about. But nowadays, it has been completely transformed. All the surrounding walls have been taken down, so now the park is much more open and inviting. What really sets it apart is the fact that it's been redesigned to resemble a miniature resort with a small, man-made hill at the center and a cluster of traditional-style buildings all around. These buildings are inspired by Vietnamese architecture from the Nguyen and Tran dynasties, two-story houses with curved rooftops, wooden pillars, and tiled walkways. The whole place has a nostalgic and historic vibe, making it a perfect spot for sightseeing, photography, or just taking a stroll.